Welcome to the Not Boring Tech Writer, a podcast sponsored by Knowledge Owl. Together, we explore topics and hear from other writers to help inspire us, deepen our skills, and foster our distinctly not boring tech writing community. Hello, my fellow not boring tech writers. It's time for another guest episode, and today I am so excited to welcome to the podcast a guest who introduced me to the phrase empathy advocacy, and whom I feel deeply aligned with on so many tech writer things. And I'm delighted also that he agreed to come on the pod. So please welcome to the podcast, Ryan Macklin. Thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure and a delight, not just one, but both, to get to hang out and chat with you on this.
Thank you so much. So Ryan and I first crossed paths, I think several years ago at one of the virtual Write the Docs events, and have kind of stayed in touch, continued to share ideas back and forth, and recently reconnected at Write the Docs Portland. So we have a really long Write the Docs narrative history between the two of us. But Ryan, there's also a whole lot about you I don't know. So this is a great introduction for everyone. Can you tell me a little bit about your tech writer villain origin story? How did you get into this crazy field?
So I started off as a 6 or 8 year old, a computer hacker. My grandfather taught me BASIC on an old Trash 80. And so pretty much throughout my early childhood, I was just this nerd who was working on cobbled together machines, learning stuff. I went to computer science for school. And so my whole life seemed like it was going to be very technical, but not necessarily communication oriented. But due to a random creative writing class I took in high school, that's when the world kind of opened up, and I got invited to another special creative writing class for seniors. And that kind of got me into publishing my own work. And I was also a role-playing gamer, so I got into writing for role-playing games and stuff like that, which was this amazing sort of eye-opening world. At first exciting because I was young and got to do what I loved and didn't realize I was being exploited for very low amounts of money. Then I became an editor on role-playing games where I knew I was being exploited for low amounts of money, but needed a job. I ended up at that point leaving software development. Just kind of, I felt like I saw the writing on the wall because I'm a third generation software developer, and I watched my grandfather and my uncle start to lose work opportunities as they got older. So I wanted to make sure that I had other things that I could do. So I got into editing. And the thing about role-playing games is that's a form of technical editing and creative editing.
That's a nice combo.
I turned that into an actual tech writing career. I used samples of books that I wrote or edited actually as my samples for getting my first tech writing job.
I love that.
And not just that, there were some other things too that were more technical, but the way that I position that is that role-playing game writing or editing, like book production, is harder than technical writing because it incorporates things about technical writing and then some. The technical writing, the reason that sometimes technical writers can get shafted on the job is that we are not necessarily seen as the product. But it is not possible to not see a tabletop game, the text is not the product. If the text is not engaging or is confusing not just confusing, which can happen, but even just not engaging, not inspiring, all of those other sort of emotional qualities, the product can just be dropped for a different game. It's not like you need to use this product for work unless you are stuck with the docs. So this was documentation on hard mode. And having to also document for, it's essentially no matter how you go, you are documenting for what's essentially software running on hardware, which is a bunch of disconnected, squishy brains. That's the hardware that role-playing games run on and that a lot of other tabletop games run on. So that's just inconsistent. So you're also your book or whatnot, it's also the user interface that you're doing. So you have to design it within that kind of lens as well. And so all of these other things is this is actually much harder than technical writing, which is not to say technical writing isn't hard, but I have fewer challenges than I do when I was back in role-playing games.
It's a smaller number of parameters, at least. Like, you're not dealing with the entire range of human brain complexity. You're mostly dealing with software products, which, no matter how complicated they are, it's sort of a finite level of parameters, right?
And you're dealing with user interfaces that are typically at least somewhat more solidified than what I have to deal with, but that's where it came from. Is I brought those sorts of understandings of things along with like my own like journey in like CPSD therapy and neurodiversity and stuff like that. I didn't necessarily stumble into technical writing because I knew at a certain point in my role-playing game career that I would like to make more than barely minimum wage in the city of Seattle. With just barely health insurance. So I knew I wanted to get back into tech as a technical writer, but I was really surprised at how many things I was able to bring that aren't traditionally a part of technical writing, bring that to bear and to translate that into stuff that, which I ended up eventually naming empathy advocacy for lack of a better term for this kind of concept. Because user advocacy was taken and is overloaded anyway. So
yes, but even in the sort of RPG background, it's a really interesting story because it very much centers reader experience in that. So it actually does make sense as a narrative arc. I did not know that about you though, Ryan. That's a fantastic and also a good lesson to those of you trying to break into tech writing, that there are a whole bunch of fields where you have deeply amazing skill sets that do translate really well if you are willing to take a step back and really compare apples to oranges and realize that they're all fruit and that some of the same stuff you do with one kind of fruit, you can do with another kind of fruit.
I have never heard that extension of apples to oranges, but like they're both kind of, I hope you're cool with the concept of theft because I'm stealing that.
That's fine. You just told me you're stealing it. Therefore, I can go forth, steal that.
Now I have permission. Now it's a little less fun, but I'll still do it.
So that's a bit about your background getting into the field. What is your current role? What are you up to right now?
I'm a tech writer focusing on like really specific requirements documentation. So it ends up being very specific language and like pacing structures and stuff like that other companies have to use to adhere to like using our product. I write some softer stuff as well, but my main deal is basically maintaining around 750 pages of like very highly specified, not just like specific specifications with all sorts of implications that happen. If someone says, oh, hey, I want to introduce, like, I want to casually use this word, I'm like, I actually have to search to see if this word has a definition that you're not aware of. And so I end up having to basically be so in some cases, custodian, in some cases, like information architect for just an ongoing, like many years long product that keeps being updated. That's my main job. And it sounded at first like it would not be like it'd be just sort of like it, and it technically is just a part of my job, but it sounded like it would be like, oh, sometimes things come in and you have to update them. And it turned out that the amount of information management that happens with a position like this, where you like have to make sure that what goes out does not have any sort of like cascading blowback on something on some other part of that like 750 page doc set, ends up being actually a lot of time, a lot of energy.
I'm sure.
It's actually at times kind of exhausting because of the amount of stuff I have to have in my head at any one time to know where to look for things. Even it's not even just what do you know? It's just remembering, okay, if this happens, where do I even need to look to see if there's a conflict or anything like that? So my main deal, which is to say, my main deal is I am like the caretaker. And I guess the word come to mind is nursemaid for these docs at times.
I recently did a solo episode on the concept of doc stewardship, and I feel like maybe you fall into that category as well. But nursemaid has a whole set of connotations that I'm kind of enjoying. So maybe I'll stick with that.
So I've always found that to be a big part of technical writing, just your ability to wield rapport, to gain social capital, to know when to spend that social capital. Like all of those things are those are explicit in my mind. Like whenever I ask something of somebody, I sort of go through the mental thing of okay, do I have social capital where I can just ask this? Do I have to promise something in return? Do I have to, this is important, but this might not be their form of importance, even though this can block publication. How do I make it important to them? And then how do I get them to want to be on board with me in the future and not dread when I message them? So yeah, bedside manner is a thing that I have to deal with. And as a neurodiverse person, as a thing that I also struggle with. So it's why it has to be very intentional.
Yeah, that makes sense. There are so many folks that we have to interact with to create documentation, update documentation, validate documentation. And the writing is, we had Marsha Reefer Johnston on a few months ago, and she talked about how writing was actually the minority of the time, really. That a huge portion of your time is figuring out who you need to talk to, getting the right people to provide information, getting feedback from the right people to make sure that what you're putting out is accurate and that you've interpreted all that correctly. And that's a lot of project management, but it's also a lot of personality management. And yeah, there's a lot of pitfalls that you can fall into if you aren't thinking about sort of the social context you're operating within as you're trying to work on that documentation.
And because of that, my notes often, when I'm tracking tickets or things like that, get really meticulous. I talk about who I talked to, when I talked to them, the decision that came from it, any sort of pending questions. I make sure that when there is sort of a problem or decision log or something like that, that it's somewhere actually in writing. And every time, not just for the CYA aspect, but future me really loves it when past me remembers to write something down. Something that I've talked with my therapist at some point is I want to form a better relationship with future me. So I'm trying to do things that I know future me would appreciate. And he's really like that idea of a relationship with future you is a great concept. Yeah.
It's fantastic. I mean, I talk a lot. My team thinks that I'm just the most gung-ho on documentation ever. And I certainly am. I believe very strongly in the power of good documentation. But a huge driver for that is also that I have a terrible memory at this point in my life. And so I have turned to documenting conversations I had, decisions that I made, whatever, so that 3 years from now, when the Swiss cheese that is my brain can't remember anything about that, I can look at documentation that former me wrote and go, oh, that's right. This is how I solved that problem, or why I chose to solve the problem this way, or who I consulted when we made decisions about X. It really is an act of service to your future self. It's great customer service.
I have another thing that I also find notes, which is, when did I say this? Go, because time blindness can be a thing. Be oh, I said, even to the thing of trying to remember, if my partner asked me to do something, I have to try to consciously remember, oh, I need to write immediately make a calendar entry on there so that A, I don't forget, and then B, I can note down also when I agreed to the thing and when I said that I would do it or something like that, so that I understand that oh, this is actually going to take me a bit. I need to make sure the time blindness doesn't sneak up on me. So the when aspect, it creates a temporal point that you can, a concrete temporal point that you can kind of latch on to as well.
Yeah. Yeah. There's some good mental mapping happening there. Maybe one last final intro question. I've been using the label tech writer through a lot of this. I know in the Write the Docs community, a lot of people use documentarian. Is there a particular title or role or label that you feel most drawn to out of all of those?
I'd say, I like the term content strategist, but it has different connotations, and it's the sort of thing that it works in some realms better than in other ones. In some realms, tech writer is actually going to be seen as some more authoritative than And content strategist or content designer can kind of maybe feel more project managery, even though they're the same thing. It's just a different label. So I like that as sometimes a way to say that I am not just a writer. And in fact, as brought up, writing it's like less than 50% of what I do is writing for users. I do lots of writing. Just some of that is writing notes or writing justifications or occasionally writing white papers onto why we're about to make a terrible decision. So there's a lot of writing, just not as much user writing as you would think.
I think the distinction there really is the idea of incorporating the element of strategy into the title, because sometimes people view tech writers almost like order takers. Like, I just want to order this round of documentation on X, and then we're just supposed to go magically create it. And that's all we do. But in reality, most of us are doing way bigger picture stuff than that, or want to be doing way bigger picture stuff than that. And finding ways to incorporate that broader strategic approach is fantastic. Whether you can do that with a label, whether you can do that just through the work that you choose to do.
There is a drawback, though, to content strategy as a term that I would say, which is that because you lose the sort of the technical part of it, is that there are possibly one of the other things that I do at my job is I write tooling for stuff. Like I'll do like Python or sort of like other bits of tools. And so I think as a content strategist, I would probably not be seen as tapping onto that, but as sort of like technical writer, there's it's really just about perception. It's nothing about who I am as a person and whatever title I give. It's about what that title feels like it communicates to people. And so this is a position where technical writer allows me to really leverage the technical part of that term, while unfortunately having to deal with the pitfalls of the writer part of that term.
Thank you for all of that context. We've both mentioned empathy advocacy, and I'd both to get you to talk about what that is, but also maybe a little bit of villain origin about how you came to put those two words together.
It started by trying to find ways to communicate to people who were technical, but not necessarily user sympathetic, the reasons for decisions that I was making or questions I was asking or things like that, where I would I'd ask questions where I would get those various engineers or whatnot being like, why are you asking me this? Or what does it even matter? Or explaining to some of our like UX people of like the implications of like, well, if you do this looks nice, but here's the things that we will have to do to explain it to users and what sort of implications that will have on their processing of both the UI and the interface or things like that. And then as I got more involved at like my first big real tech writing job, into being able to drive some of the product decisions, be like, hey, if you do, this will happen. I had to make justifications for it. And so I used the describing essentially like different mental states of users, particularly those in like distress of some point, basically some sort of like dysregulated state or basically not quote unquote optimal states, and explain why these users will struggle. Started pressing upon like, I'm not writing for optimal users. I'm not writing for the good case, the happy path.
I've worked in the software world for a while on the product side and on the writing side. I've done support. And there's often, in a lot of the conversations, it is often that what gets centered is like a perfectly calm, rational user. And I'm not sure I would ever describe myself as being perfectly calm and rational, but I definitely wouldn't describe myself that way now that I live with a chronic illness. So each day that I use a tool, I am bringing a whole bunch of stuff outside of that tool into my usage of it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Some days I've got low, what I call ambient stress and low acute stress. So I might be having a really good energy day and a good brain day, and I'm coming in to explore something that has no sense of urgency and no deadline associated with it. Other days I might be coming in where I'm feeling like I'm really struggling to think coherently. My memory's not working so good. And I'm rushing into something because something is broken and I have to fix it really quickly. So I have high ambient stress that I just entered my day with, but also high acute stress from whatever this particular thing I just had just exploded that I have to fix is. My engagement with the tool and with the documentation, with support people, whomever or whatever I'm engaging with as an extension of the product there is very different on the day where I'm super stressed than it is on the day where I'm not. And to assume that everybody is coming in with no stress just seems completely unrealistic to me. Like people might be triggered. They might have all kinds of stuff going on, particularly in the reality we currently live in. There's a high likelihood that somebody's coming in, half their team just got laid off, and suddenly they're having to learn how to use your tool or whatever that might be. And what I love about the way that you've kind of defined and presented empathy advocacy is that it is making us aware of all of that. And then trying to provide some strategies to say, okay, now that you are aware of that, try to be intentional in how you are structuring your documentation and how you're structuring the language that you're using and the visual assets you might be using, because you are recognizing that people are not coming here in a perfect state. And that like the quote unquote stupid users that a lot of devs or engineers will complain about are actually probably like 90% of your users. And it's not that they're stupid. It's that they're busy and they're stressed and something in their brain is just not like letting them perfectly absorb exactly the way your brain worked when you designed the thing. And so it encourages this level of just like centering humanity rather than centering the technology that I find really refreshing and really useful.
And to build on what you just said, like the acute stress concept, like I also think about two different vectors of acute stress. There's direct acute stress from the thing you're dealing with. And then there's outside acute stress, like just getting a text from your partner that they want a divorce is definitely going to, is while you were dealing with some payroll software, is going to change how you're looking at that payroll software.
100%.
Even if you were in a neutral in a sort of mindset. I've been growing to like that over calm for like the
I like
reason
neutral
I
better.
To, like
it's a much better word.
Because calm is a loaded term. And people don't think it is, but I could go on a rant about that. I could go on a rant actually about how logical is actually an emotional state. Because it's a series of different emotional states that can be contradictory.
Yeah.
But that's a rant. But those both can lead to issues with the software. And while one is something that you can maybe more directly mitigate because you understand that these maybe come up, the other one you can't. But if there are strategies you can do to at least, again, blunt the issue. And it's like not that we're supposed to take responsibility for how people feel, but at least to do what we can to help. I see that as also a way to be like friends with our customer service folks, because our customer service folks are going to be dealing with particularly distressed people for whatever reason. There's a talk I have that I gave called toxic, I forget what it's like. So you want to play toxic tennis or something like that, which is taking the ideas of empathy advocacy and focusing them specifically about customer support issues and communication rather than about documentation. And some of that actually comes from couples counseling, which as a side note, I loved, like as I was getting into couples counseling with my current partner, I discovered how much of it was actually paying somebody to be a translator for us.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, this is what you mean by this, what I mean by this. Like, let's learn to like speak the other's language and like create the shared language that is stuff like that. So it was interesting to find that like it wasn't just translation, but to find out how much of it was like, oh, here's a misunderstanding that a third person can actually identify where the root of that misunderstanding comes from. So that sort of a lot of those principles weirdly actually apply to in a one-sided way to being a better customer service agent who like can understand why people come from where they are, especially like really angry people coming to you with like a lot of like anger energy and say like, well, we're helping neither of us here with that. But so with that sort of frame is like, okay, here's why people are the way they are in a broad sense.
And actually, this is maybe a good point for us to take a quick break, and then we can come back and dig a little bit more into that. Does that work for you?
Absolutely. I have dry mouth, so let me fix that.
Then we will be right back. This episode is sponsored by KnowledgeOwl, your team's next knowledge-based solution. You don't have to be a technical wizard to use KnowledgeOwl. Our intuitive, robust features empower teammates of all feathers to spend more time on content and less time on administration. Learn more and sign up for a free 30-day trial at knowledgeowl.com. And we are back with more with Ryan Macklin. So Ryan, before the break, we were talking a little bit about continued practical applications of this.
Aside from the accessibility issues regarding it, there can be subtle issues with just a sense of, well, this is a really long scroll bar on this page. I was looking for a quick answer, like just sort of a prompting somebody who is already primed for, say, a frustration response or are mentally exhausted, which is actually another state that is really important to account for. We'll sort of have to deal with that, either seeing how much information they have to like sort through or the amount of visual processing they have to do for something that actually might be a very quick explanation. So for that, I tell people, okay, reduce the screenshots. If you can remove a screenshot and instead of having 3 screenshots, have one grounding screenshot to set people into like, here's where you need to like, if it looks like this, you're at the right starting point or you're at the right midpoint or whatever. And then say from there, do these 4 things and then you're good. Or do these 4 things and now this modal will pop up or something like that. So reducing screenshots, it makes it feel as though the directions are shorter. And so that will give people maybe more of a sense of they're not feeling confident, then at least seeing that they don't have as much work to do there. If they're exhausted, they're having a lot of problems generating that neurochemical energy in order to actually process stuff. Because the civilization part of your brain, I mean, it's expensive to do that. I mean, one of the reasons that we take so long to like gestate and become like even just like young adults and stuff like that, and why we need so much care as infants versus like other mammals is how big our brain is and how much energy it takes to run it. And so if you're feeling depleted, and that's part of empathy advocacy is considering that aspect of it. If you're feeling depleted, your ability to process complex or lengthy information is shot. Even if you want to, it's not there.
Yep.
So for that reason, it's another reason to reduce the amount of screenshots to either accommodate for people who are already sort of in that more exhausted state, or to at least reduce the amount of taxing you do so that after they have read your stuff, they are not then doing your stuff while becoming more exhausted over time, or even just to save them in general from whatever next thing you have to deal with has nothing to do with your product and being exhausted. But it is understanding that everything you put in has a tax.
I like thinking of it that way. You mentioned social capital earlier, but there's also this sort of like cognitive capital that you're asking people to either bank or use when they're interacting with your materials, right? And for the same reason that we don't necessarily want to have this massive wall of text, I think sometimes writers take the approach of, well, I don't want a wall of text, so let me add some screenshots so it'll break up the text itself. But as you point out, that is going to create a really long scroll bar, and it's going to make a process that might actually only be like 7 steps feel like it's 30 because of the amount of scrolling. And you talk about this in, I think, the 7 docs techniques rooted in empathy talk, right? And one of the points you made, I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that, using it as like a grounding thing, as you mentioned already, using it as sort of like a validation that if you've gotten to the right point. And I like that use of screenshots becomes more like how you would use like an admonition or a call out at that point to be like, ooh, I'm going to draw attention to this important thing.
Absolutely.
So there's like an important checkpoint here. If you've gotten here safely, the rest of the steps are going to make easy sense. Let me give you the one screenshot to help you ground yourself on that point, because if you're really off base here, the last 4 steps are not going to make any sense. I really appreciate it, that concept of I don't need a screenshot for every step, but I need a screenshot to help mark that you're in the right place. It's like when you see the sign a mile before you get to an exit on the highway that's reminding you that the exit's there. And you're like, oh, yes, that is the exit I need. I remember this now. And you can guide yourself the rest of the way, right? Signposting. That's the word I was looking for.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And like there are other reasons to reduce screenshots. Again, like accessibility, their maintainability, but I found actually maintainability is an argument that doesn't get people on board, because at least, I mean, I have found in my experience that the case, I'm not saying that is like the case across the board.
Could I get you to talk about FAQs? I hate FAQs. Let me preface this by saying I loathe FAQs with just about every fiber of my being. However, I do feel like it's come up in a couple of your talks, and I'd love to have you drop some FAQ wisdom on us here.
So what I say is FAQs are where information goes to die. And the reason is because there's so many bad things about FAQs. When I do the sort of the visual storytelling aspect of this that I've done in the 7 Docs talk and other talks too, I demonstrate it by showing that an FAQ is a desk. And initially the desk might have a couple things on there. You can easily search and find it, but the desk becomes messier and messier over time. It becomes a place where you might see someone say, hey, if you want to go to check out our FAQ, but it doesn't, when I see FAQ, I don't necessarily feel like I know I'm going to get the answer I'm looking for. It just tells me that you give me a grab bag of stuff. I'll search for it and hope that maybe I can get the answer that's in there, but it doesn't necessarily communicate to me where I'm going to get what I'm going to get out of it. And so I say, like, there are reasons for the concepts of FAQs that are good and the reason for the concept of FAQs that are not good. And the not good tends to be people just have something that they need to like vomit onto a page. You get this a lot when customer service folks run documentation. They'll do a lot of that because they want to get something out there somewhere.
Yep.
But they are also constantly dealing with people. So the most expedient way for them to do that, and the most like cognitively efficient way for them to do that, since their primary job of dealing with people is pretty taxing, is to vomit an FAQ. Just tag it at the end of an FAQ or something like that.
Because you don't have to think about information architecture.
Exactly.
You're not heavily having to think about titles and cross-references and everything else. You can at least just I don't want this to sound offensive. I don't mean it offensive, but it is sort of like, I'm going to brain dump onto the page so I know that content is somewhere out there in the world. It is referenceable, and which is like, it's a great first step. But if that's the entirety of your process, you're going to have this freaking smorgasbord of unrelated questions and answers that are kind of a nightmare for somebody to have to wade through. Speaking of the endless scroll bar, and that's, again, not the experience you want people to have, particularly people who are already activated or triggered in some way. They're already feeling overwhelmed by whatever their current reality is. They don't also need to be overwhelmed trying to find the answer to a question.
Well, then since some people try to solve the FAQ got out of control by turning into like Zippy's collapsible text stuff, which is absolute garbage for garbage people, because if you're trying to like control F to find something, you might have been able to find it in a search bar or something like that, and it loads the page, but now you can't find the thing that you were looking for on the page. So like, that's not actually collapsible text is generally terrible for that reason. That's how some people try to get around the big FAQ. It's like, well, and again, like a customer service person might not necessarily be, versed in information architecture, or may not actually even have the permission to do, like maybe they only have permission to throw stuff on an FAQ. They might not be able to like do it even if they understand the implications. But what I say instead is that if you are trying to, there is a good reason for an FAQ kind of concept, which is to collect related information together that may not be like, instead of having them all as separate pages or whatnot. And so if instead, I like to do it as like troubleshooting X concept, like troubleshooting your internet connection, for instance, and it might have some information there. And like troubleshooting this other thing, or like stuff like that allows you to then have that kind of concept of, hey, it is the concept of like FAQ-ish stuff of here's a collection of things. Hopefully you still do some good information architecture and breakout or whatever you need to do. But then the title of the page itself tells you what the sort of the promise of that page is.
It's not the intensely vague FAQs or frequently asked questions. It is troubleshooting your internet connection or whatever that's going to provide both to the reader, but also to anybody who's adding content there, a set of guardrails to be like, it all relates to this topic. And then I can still use that same general format, but I'm at least giving you this really nice, huge flag about what this content is actually related to, so that if you happen on this page, you actually know whether the question that you want to ask might be contained here or not.
Yeah. Well, and with a large FAQ, like a big doc, you may not even realize that you're creating multiple sources of truth of the same thing that are contradictory. Yeah. Like there's other aspects to the unmanaged text vomit that are there. But like it's the joke that I hate, that's particular, the technically correct is the best kind of correct. And I was like, my verbal knives will come out when someone says like, oh no, I will tell you about how wrong you are right now. So it's the same sort of thing of like, these are technically published, and technically published is the worst kind of published. And so, you like genuinely publish, properly publish with some sort of thought. Like if what you need to do to get it out in the first place is this, and you have mechanisms that help redirect or whatnot when it's refactored or whatever, fine. But like try to properly publish rather than just technically publish and feel like you've accomplished what you need to accomplish. But yeah, so that's an aspect there. We really talked, I think, more about sort of that's half of like understanding that people who are looking for answers, this brings me another thought. The FAQs brings up another framing of this. So let's talk about. So there's at this point I have like 4 buckets of cognitive states that creates different sort of challenges, which is the anxious, the frustrated, the exhausted. Sort of briefly touched on that one. The other one is also the curious. And it doesn't sound like that. Sounds like, well, what is that? Why is that a problem? It's like, well, the curious person is actually somebody who is looking to satiate something in their brain that is just looking for like information and whatnot. It's the reason that people go onto like Wikipedia or TV tropes rabbit holes.
I want to go down the rabbit hole. I will go deeply down that on certain things and certain things only. Yes, absolutely.
So an FAQ can be distracting if it has other random stuff in there. Because curiosity is actually another way of saying distractible, and so if you have unfocused material, unfocused messaging, things like that, anything that might give people the wrong off-ramp when you don't intend them to, that can make it so that by the time they get back to the material that they're actually looking for, there could be more like cognitive expense that they've already like incurred. There can be maybe some framing in their head from other stuff that they have read that is actually like misleading them in interpreting information. So to be able to make sure that you are directing people to the right place isn't just about dealing with frustrated users who are just becoming more and more frustrated as their issues not being addressed, or anxious users who are sort of that's building on their, or exhausted users who just run out of cognitive energy as they're trying to sift through your stuff and just stop. But it's also for distractible users who are vulnerable to being led astray by unfocused material. And sometimes it's distractible in a way that isn't like distractible isn't just like, oh, I'm kind of like somewhat bored and sort of looking around, but it could be, I have 5 things in my head right now as the problems I have to solve. This is the one I actually need to solve. But suddenly I see the answer to a different problem I need to solve. And now that has become more pressing in my brain, even if it's not more pressing situationally. And so I am currently following my brain impulse to chase that down, even if that is not what I should be chasing down right now. And so
we should not be waving shiny things in front of you to distract you from the task that you originally set out to complete.
Or understand that you might be at times and make that an intentional decision, or understand that's the trade-off to something else, which, I mean, that's the thing. Like, you can't necessarily avoid that entirely, but if you can reduce the times where you're unnecessarily doing it, like with unfocused FAQs, then fantastic.
I feel like that also ties into the adage of, if you're using callouts, use them sparingly and with great purpose, because the more of them you use, either the more distracting they become, or the more people tune them out. And because they're overwhelmed by the volume of them. It's like the two sides of that same coin, it seems like.
If everything is bold, nothing is bold.
And this is a perfect segue into some of the closing questions I like to ask. The first of which is, are there resources that you would like to share with everybody? And we are going to link to a bunch of the talks that we've referenced, but you also have a website, I think, on empathy advocacy.
So I have a site, empathyadvocacy.org, for this sort of thing, that by the time this comes out, at least want to like refresh it enough so that it can be a mailing list, so that people like can see like stuff that I'm talking. Occasionally I'll like share something there and maybe build it out into something sort of like more substantial. But this is a place where I want to put that stuff there. So that'll be one. And my own site, which same sort of situation, is macklin.cc, which is where I have stuff, or would be having stuff by the time this comes out. And then hypothetically, I'm on LinkedIn. I remember to check it on occasion, and probably should get better at that. But I say that, like, I've said that for like the last 2 years of, I should probably get better at this.
Ongoing refrain in my life. But I understand.
But those would be the couple places to go for that. Yes, so those would be where to go. Yeah, empathyadvocacy.org and macklin.cc.
To close a little bit, Ryan, just to change gears a little bit, what is a great piece of advice that you've been given? It does not have to have anything to do with anything that we just talked about. I would just like to sponge amazing advice from other people.
I'd say one I've gotten recently was to, if I'm trying to chase down something from a stakeholder, to file an independent ticket and assign it to them. Like, if they're not responding or they're really slow, if I'm trying to chase down a stakeholder who's not being communicative, they're busy, overwhelmed. Everyone's getting laid off. So,
we're all overwhelmed.
It's either they're overwhelmed or that person's laid off and now I'm having to track down a new person who has no idea, for whatever reason. Like, if they're not being communicative to me or they're taking a long time to get back, is to actually like file a ticket and assign it to them. And be like, hang on, like, this is no longer just like, hey, I'm sending you a quick chat message or an email, or I'm tagging you like on a PR or something. Like, no, like, I'm actually making this now a thing that is now in your queue, and people will see it's in your queue and like addressing it, or you show your lack of addressing it or whatnot. So doing that is actually something that is like a recent, like, oh, I can do that. I don't have to just rely on tagging people or things like that. Like, I can sort of in my mind escalate that to an independent ticket to try to get something. Okay. That's kind of an interesting tool in my arsenal for when I am trying to get information from someone on that's a publication like blocker.
It's interesting. I have kind of a similar process within Knowledge Out. So we use Asana as a project management tool. And I get asked a lot of questions in our company Slack for things. And if it's something I can't answer on the spot, I think my team is so sick of this, but I'm like, give me a task in Asana for it, because it's going to take more. Because for me, that is a little bit of work. That is actual formal work for me to craft a response or provide feedback on the thing. And I will forget to do it if it's not in the same place that the rest of my formal work gets tracked. So, I mean, maybe some people view that as a passive aggressive thing, but I actually prefer it because it's like, oh, now I have a clear set of a list of what's expected of me, what I need to provide feedback on to give to others. I like the visibility of that. I like the transparency of it. I would prefer that to you pinging me privately and then me feeling bad and forgetting about it for 2 weeks. And you may be thinking that I am intentionally ignoring you when actually I just forgot we had that conversation.
I feel like I want to give something, though, that isn't so like process oriented. I guess it's to there's a concept in the like indie role-playing gaming sphere, at least from a long ass time, like called fail forward. It's also kind of like an improv concept and stuff. And like in the realm of like tech writing, I've embraced that to saying like, okay, if there's some sort of decision that's being made that I think is going to cause us to like, is going to cause problems down the road, sometimes I just have to accept doing it and letting the failure happen and documenting it and like instead of holding it up until we get the perfect solution that I'm trying to go for, is for us to risk fail and fail forward and to like go ahead, be okay failing sort of publicly or whatnot, learning from it and moving on. That satisfies some people's need to like publish now, while also accounting for risk management and documenting like your hypothesis and then seeing if it's true or not. But like the idea is that you like be okay failing forward instead of just getting like soft locked into your head about stuff. And after getting laid off back in 2023, I was so soft locked for a long time that like it really like it was hard to get back in that fail forward thing. Like it's an intentional thing to think about, to have to do. It isn't, at least it is for me. So like it's advice that I have to repeat to myself. And that's one of the things that I learned from my time in role-playing games. So that was just a principle in games of like, if your character fails, cool, make it cool and fail forward. Don't just be flat about it. And so, but I extend that those two words into something different in real life than in the narrative world.
Which brings us really nice full circle back to how we started this episode. So thank you, Ryan. You tied that up in a nice little bow for me. I love it.
Excellent. I didn't intend to do that, but weirdly, that's actually a thing that I frequently end up doing anyway.
Well, thank you, my friend. This has been an absolute delight. I'm so thankful we got to have this chat. And I'm also really excited to share a lot of these resources with the broader community, because I think these are the kinds of conversations that are especially important in our field right now. Things that we think about that AI doesn't think about.
Yeah, I not opening up another can of worms on the podcast right now. We had a good ending point, but I'm shaking my fist at, not at AI specifically, but at the culture.
The decisions being made around AI.
Yeah,
Let's maybe leave it at that. These are the kinds of things that we as human beings, as tech writers, bring to the table, and ways that we can offer perspective and strategy that is way different from anything you're going to get from an automated process. And the more we can center that and continue to provide that expertise, I think the better the world will be. And the less stressful the docs experiences will be. And that's great.
And because we at this point can't escape a world with like AI doing things, it gives us lenses, frameworks, abilities, whatnot, to use that stuff that's generated by AI to validate it, to like interpret it, to reinterpret it, things like that. So like I'm not a don't use AI person, in at least within the realm of like technical writing. But this gets into like, well, when you use it, don't stop thinking about the human aspect.
Yeah.
Or do. I'm not your boss. You do what you want.
Well, thank you, Ryan, for all of your wisdom and insight today. The Not Boring Tech Writer is co-produced by our podcast head of operations, Chad Timblin, and me. Post-production is handled by the lovely humans at Astronomic Audio, with editing by Dylan, transcription by Maddie, and general post-production support by Bean and Alex. Our theme song is by Brightside Studio. Our artwork is by Bill Netherlands. You can order the Not Boring Tech Writer t-shirts, stickers, mugs, and other merch from the merch tab on thenotboringtechwriter.com. You can check out Knowledge Owl's products at knowledgeowl.com. And if you want to work with me on docs, knowledge management coaching, or revamping an existing knowledge base, go to knowledgewithsass.com. That's knowledgewithsass.com. Until next time, I'm Kate Mueller, and you are the Not Boring Tech Writer.